So, and what's your overall impression of the Russian economy?
Yeah, it's super interesting. It seems that the war has really put fire under the Russian economy. GDP is growing, and I believe that the poverty rate of poverty in Russia is so far down that we have to go back to before the fall of the Berlin Wall to
Mhm.
see similar levels of low poverty. The whole economy has essentially been engaged in providing arms, clothes, whatever else is necessary to the men on the front lines, and has kind of, yeah, as I said, the fire under the whole economy.
Hello out there, and welcome to this week's edition of GeoPortfolio. My name is Mikkel Rosenvold, and I'm the partner of Steno Research of Geopolitics here at Steno Research. Steno Research is a macro and geopolitical analysis house. We provide you with research within these topics, always actionable and relevant to your portfolio. If you want to read more, you can sign up to our free newsletter in the link below, or you can sign up for a free trial to get full access for 14 days to our model portfolio, crypto portfolio, geopolitical content, and loads more. This week in GeoPortfolio, we're going to focus on Russia. We are slowly getting closer to the Russian election, and we have seen the killing of Alexei Navalny. That's become a huge suspect. And both in the EU and the US, there are huge rumblings about the support, continued financial support and weapons support for Ukraine. So this is very much beginning to raise as a topic again within your portfolio, the Ukraine-Russia war, and it's becoming increasingly important for your portfolio as well. And with me today, I have, as usual, Anne, live from Paris. Welcome to you, Anne.
Thank you.
Great
And
to
not least, Saturday is obviously the 2-year anniversary of the invasion, so very apt to talk about Russia today.
Exactly. I've written extensively in this war, obviously, throughout the last 2 years. It's been a main topic for a lot of our institutional clients at Steno Research, and very important for us to cover it. I mean, it seems like and that the pendulum has been shifting a bit for the war. Initially, of course, we were all shocked about the invasion. Then a couple of months later, Ukraine were able to push Russia back in a couple of places. Then Russia pushed back into Bakhmut. We had the Ukrainian summer offensive. Then now Russia have been pushing back. What we'll try and do today is to look a little bit more long term, because not a whole lot is happening on the front line over the past 12 to 18 months, basically. So we're trying to put on the long side a little bit and look at Russia's ability to keep this war going. And I know you've been looking a little bit about Russia's finances because obviously war is a costly endeavor. I just brought on one chart that shows the Russian GDP growth, and essentially what you see here is that during the early stages of the war, the Russian GDP was in decline. Basically, Russia lost a lot of trade, obviously, especially with Europe. But in recent quarters, Russia have been able to replace some of that trade. Some of that trade is directed through third party countries, and have
Mm,
actually seen rising GDP numbers.
yeah.
So, and what's your overall impression of the Russian economy?
Yeah, it's super interesting. It seems that the war has really put fire under the Russian economy. GDP is growing, and I believe that the poverty rate of poverty in Russia is so far down that we have to go back to before the fall of the Berlin Wall to
Mhm.
see similar levels of low poverty. The whole economy has essentially been engaged in providing arms, clothes, whatever else is necessary to the men on the front lines, and has kind of, yeah, as I said, the fire under the whole economy. And obviously, as you kind of allude to, these sanctions have had a dwindling level of effectiveness as Russia has kind of built this illicit network of way to circumvent, especially trade barriers.
Exactly.
One example, there was a Norwegian risk consultant group that came out with a report saying that especially Germany and Lithuania in Europe have been able to kind of, um, I'm not saying intentionally, but what's happened is a lot of the, let's say, diesel powered vehicles produced in Germany, instead of exporting them straight to Russia, they have then like quadrupled the export to Armenia instead. And then in a roundabout way, those vehicles end up in Russia. So that's
Exactly.
how kind of Russia have been able to keep afloat. not importing directly, but importing from, as you say, these third party countries.
Exactly. One important notice that you should keep in mind, or an important note, is that a lot of this Russian GDP growth is fueled by public spending and public borrowing, not the least. The Russian public debt has increased massively throughout 2022 and 2023. The thing is, two things. This is to be expected when you're waging such a war. I know the Russians don't want to call this a war, but it is a war and it is costly. And second of all, the Russian public GDP or public levels of public debt relative to GDP is still very, very low. It's below 20% in most by most measures, which is significantly lower than most European countries, and especially, of course, the U.S. So Russia may have a problem with gaining access to foreign capital. They may have some options in China, obviously, but they still have a lot of potential for domestic borrowing from their own consumers. So financially, Russia's doing quite okay in the short term. Russia's obviously becoming more and more dependent on China, which is a long-term strategic problem. But in the short term, I agree completely, and it seems that Russia are actually doing okay, at least. I want to,
Something I'm
yeah,
following really closely is also this new sanctions package, which has been announced by Biden, which will be announced here tomorrow on Friday. And it's super interesting because it's going to be very politically contentious, right? What they have essentially targeted every source of income that Russia could possibly have, but obviously they're seeing the same numbers as us, that the effects of these sanctions have not what they've wished for. So what I'll be looking at, if they'll now go into these maybe secondary sanctions, as they're called, targeting these roundabout third party countries and banks, let's say in Turkey or the Emirates. Um, but again, as you say, that's kind of contentious, right? Because
yeah,
do we want to push them further into to the arms of Russia, essentially? Same with the oil caps. Looking at that again, that could have potential political consequences for domestic oil prices in the U.S., which would be detrimental in an election year. So I'm watching that sanction package very closely.
absolutely. And so, aside from money, what else do you need to run a war that we can keep a track of? Well, you need men, and Russia's been taking a lot of losses since the war started. It's been more or less a steady figure of about 20,000 men per month. Of course, these are all not the losses in this respect is not casualties. They're not dying. All of these individuals we're talking about here, it could be combat injuries, combat weariness, whatever. But still, huge amounts of losses. At least 100,000 people killed from this. And as the Ukrainians have faced, the Ukrainians have tried throughout 2023 a strategy of bleeding out the Russians. So if the Ukrainians took 5 casualties and the Russians took 10, they accepted that because they had an idea that at some point the Russian population would simply grow tired of these numbers. But it seems that Russia are able to keep resupplying, replacing these casualties with newer guys, even though they haven't launched new waves of mobilization as we saw early in the campaign. And that's been a huge surprise to me and many other observers that Russia has been able to mobilize, bring in mercenaries, what have you, to replace all these losses. And so far, Russia seems completely okay with losing 360,000 men. No other country on earth, perhaps bar China or India, could stomach such losses, especially for a country of this kind, but Russia can. One of the reasons why is obviously, if you take a look at this, this is a map of, this is an older map, but it's still relevant, and it gives a very good graphical picture of where Russian casualties are coming from. So which regions are providing the soldiers that are getting killed in Ukraine. And if you know a little bit about Russian geographics, you know that large parts of the population live up here in the white part of Russia, you could say the European part of Russia. The darkest parts are those delivering most of the soldiers and the casualties. That's in Central Asia and Buryatia, in the Caucasus, and in the Muslim regions of Russia. So basically, Putin has managed to keep the war away from the white Russian population and basically sacrifice a lot of his Muslim minorities in this war. You could call that a cynical strategy. You could call that a classical Russian strategy, but it seems to be working. Um, Putin is able to keep on pouring new Muslim guys into the conflict, basically, and it's working for them. I also wanted to show you this, Anne, a little compilation of some other factors here. Obviously, our good old friend Kim Jong Un is supplying a lot of shells. He's alone supplying as much as the EU is on artillery shells. And we are seeing some reports of Chinese mercenaries or volunteers in the Russian army as well. And all this patchwork of Muslims, Chinese mercenaries, North Korean shells, African troops, Wagner, what have you. It's enough to keep this war away from the White Russians, the ethnically White Russian, if you will. So that's another factor. Last point, Anne, and I want to bring you on here, is the political situation in Russia. Because we were all hoping that at some point the electorate would grow tired of Putin. One hope was probably Alexei Navalny, but he's gone now. We're looking into an election that's not really looking like a contest. What are your expectations here, Anne?
Yeah, so obviously it's never been that interesting who's gonna win. But still, elections in Russia matters to the political elite. It matters as a thermometer of especially how the second tier of leaders, like regional leaders, governors, how much control do they have of their jurisdictions, essentially. So Putin care a lot about good turnout, and he'll be looking at which regions in Russia has the best turnout. And it won't have consequences to him, but it might have consequences to the people right beneath him that he employ. But Putin is, again, it's going better than in Russia than a lot of Western politicians would have hoped. Also, in terms of popularity, the most recent independent poll had Putin at an 85% approval rating. And it kind of also shows in the way they're becoming less and less concerned with keeping up this uh, performer of somewhat of a democratic system. There's this infamous quote from one of his advisors that says that the elections in Russia is just expensive bureaucracy. They know Putin is very popular, and so at this point, what's the point of hiding that he's gonna be the leader for the next 6 years and maybe even beyond that?
Yes, there are speculations he's about to have to do his big annual speech in front of the Duma, the parliament. There are expectations that he will introduce plans beyond 2030, which is the end of the upcoming term that he's expected to win. So I think the only thing that can stop Putin is his lord. It's basically death. He's there as long as you want to be, or as long as higher powers want him to be. A grim outlook, and I'm sorry, but it is relevant to look at these facts because this is going to weigh in and factor in if we are to see negotiations during 2024. Russia is in a decent position to wage a long war against Ukraine. I think Russia has a lot more men to draw from, and at
Yeah,
some
just
point,
to put a number in it, there's 30 million men between
yeah,
18 and 50 in Russia. Obviously, that's just a very brute number.
mm,
But yeah, there are more to draw from, and it's clear that they care more about quantity than quality.
exactly,
Which is also
exactly.
why the economy is the important thing to look at here, because they have the men, but it's about affording to clothe them, arm them, train them. But yeah, so far the economy is not it's not going as bad as one would have hoped.
No, and perhaps earlier, just before when I alluded to higher powers, people out there might think I was talking about God. That would be the obvious interpretation of that, but there is one other power to look at, and we're going to get back into that in coming issues, and that's Xi Jinping. That is still one hope that we can have in the West, and it's a tough spot to place our hope at. But still, that's the one person on earth that Putin has to listen to. It's Xi Jinping, and I'm not sure that he wants a complete Russian victory over Ukraine because it is going to make Russia tougher to handle for China. So that's a balancing act. But aside from that, Russia is in quite a good shape, and there is no short or medium term outlook for a true Ukrainian victory. We have to acknowledge that, Anne. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up here, Anne. Thanks a lot for joining. You're going to be issuing an article that you can read on stenoresearch.com. Maybe tomorrow, maybe early next week. We'll see about that. about the Russian, where we go a little bit more in depth with the upcoming Russian election and the economical situation in the country. So thanks a lot for joining, Anne. Hopefully we can speak on somewhat brighter notes next week, but a very good rundown of Russia this time. We'll see you next weekend.
See you.
Yeah. Thanks you all for watching. We'll see you.